Hello, and welcome to episode 65 of The Partial Historians. I am your gracious host, Dr. Greenfield, and beside me, ready to rumble,
Always,
is Dr. Radness.
Indeed. Hello, everyone. So, we left it on quite a cliffhanger.
We did, and such a cliffhanger, in fact, that I don't want to talk about my trip to Italy or Rome or anything. I want to talk about Coriolanus.
Fair enough. So join us, listeners, as we once more delve into the history of Rome from the founding of the city. And today, kicking off with Coriolanus's famous, not last words, but...
If only they were. They are yet to come.
They're kind of the beginning of the end, I think. If we haven't actually got to that point already.
Look, he's still got some steam in his sails, some wind in his turbines. You know, I could continue with attempting mixed metaphors.
He is a bag of hot air.
Ooh, and how he blows.
That's right. So I'm kind of juggling accounts of Livy and Plutarch. Plutarch being a little bit more stretched out because it's totally focused on Coriolanus. Livy being a little bit shorter and more to the point.
Truncated in true Livillian style.
Yes.
I'm reading Dionysius of Halicarnassus still. Beginning to wonder about the wisdom of my selection
I'm
here.
still really cheering that I made you be the one to read Dionysius.
And the things I've read.
I'll stop laughing though when Dionysius runs out.
I'll just switch into Dionysius. It's fine.
Exactly.
But where we were at the end of the last episode was this sort of cliffhanger moment.
Yes.
Where Coriolanus has sort of... he's in trouble, really.
Yeah.
And the Senate is not really sure that they want to endorse his position because he's very strictly against the plebeians at this point in time.
Yeah, like he doesn't just dislike them. He wants to take back all the rights they've gained and put it... He wants to basically rewind the clock.
Yeah.
To ground zero.
Yeah. Classic conservatism. He's like, none of this. The plebeians don't deserve it.
Yeah.
Keep the grain price high.
Yeah.
Let them starve if they can't pay because they need to know who's really in charge.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Senate has distanced themselves somewhat from that position, being like, look, you know, maybe gentleness, kindness might be the way forward.
Yeah.
The tribunes have agreed that, sure, kindness sounds like a great idea.
But how about a little bit come our way?
Yeah, and they'd just like to hear Coriolanus agree that kindness is the way forward.
Yeah, so this is the moment we were up to where Coriolanus is at last going to speak.
Oh boy. Oh yes, and does he speak?
Yeah, well, see, I might start with my version because I know it's going to be shorter than yours. Basically, he comes out to defend himself in Plutarch's account. But of course, he's not mild, he's not modest or humble in the true sense of those words, I think. Basically, he just comes out with a fairly bold position. He never really backtracks. You know, he's not like super apologetic or anything for anything he said. It's basically, Plutarch sort of frames it as being, it's so bold that it's almost denouncing his opponents. And yeah, he's really not, he doesn't seem to be at all afraid, to the point where what he's saying makes the people who had been they'd sort of been coming over to the side of things of, okay, maybe we were being a bit extreme, you know, forgive us, that they're kind of like, oh, for goodness sakes, how can we forgive this person? He's just provoking us even further. And this leaves Sicinius, who's, you know, seemingly the most vocal of the tribunes. Yeah. To sort of confer with his colleagues and say, right, you know what? This guy deserves to be put to death right here, right now. Let's take him to the Tarpeian Rock and just throw him freaking off.
We've got a place for people like you.
Exactly, yeah. It's at the bottom of the river, that steep cliff. So yeah, that's kind of my account of things.
Okay,
yeah.
So I think that to a large degree lines up with what I've got from Dionysius of Halicarnassus.
Yeah.
So Sicinius has basically incited Coriolanus to speak, and he's like, I just want to hear you say that you've changed your position.
Yeah.
Are you really going to let the Senate speak on your behalf? Is that what a real patrician Roman would do?
Nice.
And at that moment, Coriolanus, who's been standing there, maybe attempting to look mild, but maybe failing, I'm guessing.
I'm thinking he looks kind of just like grave.
Yeah. Probably looking annoyed, pissed off.
Yeah.
Is like thrown back his arms, stepped forward, and being like, I'm not taking him back a single word. Not a word of it.
Yeah.
I don't deny what I said. I don't repent what I've said, and I'm not going to appeal to the gods for any mercy. Not only that, wait for it.
Sorry, yeah.
I absolutely refuse to acknowledge that you have any lawful right to tell me what I can and cannot do.
At the risk of dating this episode for future listeners, I once more kind of feel a Trump vibe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, continue.
I'm going to hope that Trump is a footnote to history.
That's true.
But we will see. It remains
we'll look back
to be
on
seen.
this and laugh uproariously.
Or not, depending.
Yeah.
In any case, he basically says, look, I don't think the tribunes have this capability. I refuse to acknowledge that you have any lawful claim over anything that I do.
Yeah.
And not only that, I'm actually ready to stand trial according to the laws that do count in this fair land.
Yeah. Wow.
At that point, it's a bit of a tumult.
Yes.
Everybody's going a bit crazy.
Yeah.
Obviously, the people are being characterized in this account as merely at the whim of whoever's good at rhetoric.
Yeah.
So they're first one way, they're like, oh yes, maybe we have been unkind. Maybe we could be more lenient with this guy. And then they're like, wait a minute. Our tribune who's standing up for us is angry.
Yeah.
We're angry too.
Sheep. Bah.
And we see a similar sort of separation of people in the public space that we saw earlier, where a whole bunch of those young upstart patricians are like, yeah, he's our man. I'm with this guy.
Coriolanus, he's our man. If he can't do it, no one can.
Yeah. And the plebeians are sort of like, yeah, he's the bitterest of all of our enemies. We need to get rid of him now. And the tribunes are like, yeah, from the rock, throw him from the rock.
Yeah, see, at this point, this is where the Aediles go to seize Coriolanus, to carry out this execution, right there and then. And that's when, as you say, like, everything's very confusing because the patricians are horrified. They're like, well, that escalated quickly. And they're just like, what? And even, in Plutarch's account, even the plebeians think, wait a second, this might be getting out of hand.
Yeah, look, some of them do.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got the Aediles. They're, again, attempting to go for the arrest moment.
Yeah.
And it's at that point where the consuls step in and they get the lictors involved.
Ooh.
Yeah.
The guys with the rods and the axes.
The Thasques.
Yeah.
This is getting now hardcore.
Yeah.
And they're like, you know what? Like, keep everybody separated, And the lictors are just then, like, delegated to crowd control. And everybody's like, oh, the lictors are involved. And that's kind of a calming moment for people. They're like, oh, those guys have been deployed. This is serious. I don't know if I want to keep chasing that guy down to throw him off a rock right now.
That's interesting because the patricians obviously sort of try and rush to Coriolanus' aid in Plutarch's version of things. And then the friends and family of the tribunes basically seem to talk them out of executing him then and there in Plutarch's account.
Yeah, so we see a little bit of this in Dionysius' account, and it's attributed to Brutus.
Right.
He always, seems to step in this period of time to save the day.
Yeah.
And he's like,
those Brutuses.
Yeah. Yeah, so while all of this sort of chaos is playing out, it seems that, everybody sort of backs down from the really aggressive position once the lictors have gotten involved. And everybody sort of disperses to go away and really think about their position again. Yeah. And it's at this point where Brutus sort of rocks up to Sicinius and is like, all right, do you really want to go through with this? Because the way you're trying to do it at the moment is illegal.
Yeah.
Because if you keep going and you keep rousing up the crowd and you go for this, like, trial by violence and you just throw him off the rock, he hasn't had proper due process.
That's right, yeah.
This is going to work against you in the long term.
Yeah, and that's kind of the same point that's made here, apparently, by the friends and family of the tribunes. They're basically saying, if you do this, it's going to mean that lots of other patricians will die, because it's essentially going to sort of break out into civil conflict.
Yeah. You will ensure civil war.
Exactly,
if you keep following this
on
path.
top of which, as you said, this is illegal. You're putting him to death without a trial.
And he has said he's happy to go to trial.
Yeah, exactly. So,
he's been pretty arrogant about it,
Yeah.
but he has agreed to a trial.
yeah, and so it's at this point in Plutarch that the tribunes refer his case to the people. They decide, maybe we should do things according to procedure. And so Coriolanus is ordered to stand trial. And the patricians are still kind of upset that the plebeians had actually felt that they seemingly could drag off such a prominent citizen and put him to death. Like, even the intent seems to have really rattled them.
The power of the mob!
Yeah, exactly. And Sicinius is still, Sicinius seems to still be sort of raring to go and, like, being like to the patricians, you know what? Why did you stop us? Like, why did you stop the plebeians from, punishing Coriolanus? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. So a lot of this sort of Sicinius' shift in position is basically attributed to his conversations with Brutus.
Yeah, okay.
And once he has sort of realised that actually it will be much more effective and a much more binding decision and an indictment on Coriolanus, and perhaps the patrician class in general, if he can push through to this trial.
Yeah.
He's like, he goes back to the people and he's like, look, I'm here, let me give you a little speech, let's talk this through. And he's like, let's take the higher ground here. Let us show that we choose to surpass in reasonableness rather than violence our fellow citizens who injure us.
Yeah.
And he's like, if we follow this to its legal conclusion, he will get the punishment he deserves.
Yeah. Now, at this point, Plutarch says that, so the patricians are kind of happy because they've obviously got to keep Coriolanus. They got to take him home, feed him, pet him.
Nice Coriolanus.
Yeah,
Good
right,
Coriolanus.
But they decide to apparently undertake a campaign against Antium, because they're hoping that this will kind of pacify the people before the trial of Coriolanus.
Oh, okay. So this works out very differently in my narrative.
Okay,
so you go with your version. And
well, that's pretty much what it is. They go on campaign. They're kind of hoping, in a sense, I think, that maybe this campaign would last for a fairly long time, and by the time it was all over, the people would kind of be willing to negotiate or something. But
it seems
there's a very speedy campaign against Antium, and so that plan doesn't really pan out.
I'm going to say that I think that Dionysius' account of these events is a little bit more plausible.
Yeah, well, that does sound a little...
Because the last thing I think that you would want at this point is to attempt to shoehorn some of these people onto a campaign when they're already starving.
Yeah, exactly.
And the reason why they're starving is partly based on the amount of campaigns they've been on.
I know, it doesn't seem the most
And it's like,
thing,
how are you going to convince them that that would be a good idea?
Exactly, I know. They've already had to be, basically cajoled to do anything at this point in time. It's kind of why Coriolanus has come into conflict with them.
Yeah, so from Dionysius' perspective, this plays out in a completely sort of like random kind of way. It's like the elements of fate. It's like, but it's pretty hilarious from a narrative perspective. So the consuls first get together. So Sicinius has talked to the plebeians. He's like, look, let's push ahead for this trial. No more violence for now. I'll let you know when you can, like, really go at it.
Yeah.
Hold it in the bag for now.
Yeah.
The consuls get together. They assemble the Senate. And they're like, look, we're on really shaky territory right now. Like, what are we going to do? And they first of all decide that they're going to lower the price of the grain.
Ooh.
It's going to be very cheap, very low.
Finally a sensible decision.
They're like, look, people are pretty angry and it's not getting better. We need to placate them.
Yes.
They also
need
realistically need food.
Yeah.
So let's lower the grain price. And let's see if we can ask a favour from the tribunes to just desist for now. Because we've obviously got a situation where it's escalating, it's getting out of control, and maybe if we just give it some space and they back down from their position and they've got some food to eat, we might be able to like revisit the whole issue with this Coriolanus or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because on some level, from the patrician perspective, this is not really an issue.
Yeah.
Coriolanus hasn't broken a law.
Sure. Yeah,
there's not really anything in particular that he needs to go on trial to defend at this point.
Yeah.
It's more that the threat of violence against his body has meant that he'd rather have everybody talk out their ideas in a public and safe area, like a trial, so he can then continue to argue that those privileges that the plebeians have acquired can be taken off them. So he's trying to open up space by arguing for a trial, opening up space to get his own political agenda through, rather than defend himself from any claims of having done something that might have broken any particular sort of law.
Well, that's right. I mean, I'm not quite up to this bit yet, but when eventually, the trial talk comes around again in Plutarch's account, Coriolanus essentially asks, what would the charges actually be?
Yeah.
And the charge...
Fair enough.
Yeah, they come back and say usurpation. Now, that's not really what he's been doing. As far as I can see. I mean, he's being a dick. And he's being unreasonable. But, he's not really trying to, like, seize control of the state, per se.
Yeah.
Which is what I would assume usurpation means.
Maybe
I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, I'll come to that later, because I'm not up to that part in my narrative yet.
Fair enough. Well, neither am I, really. I was just sort of talking about, the future. I mean, I suppose in a sense because he's trying to take away the control of the tribunes. He's trying to take that away.
He's trying to usurp the power of the tribunes
I can see
out of the system entirely, not for himself necessarily.
Exactly, I can see where they're coming from, but it's kind of a weird charge.
It is a little bit circular, But fascinatingly, and this is where it becomes a bit of a comedy of errors in Dionysius' account.
Yeah.
So the Senate has decided, look, we'll lower the grain price. That'll be fine. We'll ask them to, just keep cool, eat some food.
Don't be hangry.
Yeah.
Because, as the stickers ads tell us.
Obviously everybody gets more mad when they're hungry.
Yeah.
And he's a douche, don't you?
Exactly.
He says these things all the time. But unfortunately, while that's happening, the Sicilian tyrant who sold the grain to the Romans has decided that while those ships have sailed away and are parked in the harbour Antium, that he's going to then do a pirate raid, steal the grain back.
Oh dear.
Because he's like, I hear there's some chaos up in Rome. And so while they're not looking, I think what we're going to do, guys, is take our ships, raid the grain back from the people we just sold it to, and then sell it back to them again.
There's wily tyrants and pirates.
Have a plan, guys. I've got a plan. And so while that plan is being executed by the Sicilians, the Romans are like, oh no, that's the grain we're just going to give out really cheaply to the plebeians. This is a disaster.
It'll make us look like we were full of crap.
And quick, round up as many people as you can. We need a campaign. We've got to get the grain back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. And that does sound more realistic than just deciding to go on campaign just because.
Yeah, and it turns out that, Rome doesn't have heaps of forces right now because everybody's hungry and / unhappy or has been put into an outpost as a colonist somewhere.
Yeah.
So the consuls both have to go themselves with their own private people and try and sort this out to try and retrieve the grain and the people, because the people have also been kidnapped. And then come back to the city. So this sort of sense of it being a planned campaign in order to bolster certain things is interesting, but I'm not sure if it's quite as amusing / more realistic that this has crept up on the Romans. And
that makes more sense, well, because in
they're
my version...
they're having a crisis moment being and the grain? Where did we put the grain? Where are the boats, guys? Where are the boats? Oh, no.
Yeah, well, basically, in my account, after that Antium thing is speedily settled, apparently, the patricians are then okay, regroup, guys, regroup. How are we going to hang on to Coriolanus? Because I don't think that plan worked. And this is where Appius Claudius, our old friend, comes back into my narrative, where he's super hostile towards the people as well. And he's basically saying, guys, this isn't a problem. Just stand your ground, for goodness sake, you bunch of lilies. Because
what is wrong with you?
Yeah, he's basically saying, similar to what Coriolanus says, the Senate just needs to stand firm. Just, this ridiculous, oh my god, the plebeians, wondering what they're going to think. Just, if you let the plebeians walk all over you like this, you're going to be letting them impose their decisions, and that's not what this is all about. Whereas the older senators, as you sort of been referring to, they seem to be the more moderate class sometimes. They're basically saying, on the other hand, maybe we shouldn't be too harsh to the people. After all, the plebeians just feel like we don't give a crap. Mm-hmm. Which,
the way you guys are talking, that's kind of true.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And that's kind of what happens in Plutarch's account of things.
So there seems to be this almost a conflict within the patrician class about what is the value and the relationship between the patricians and the plebeians.
Totally, yeah. Like, how are we best going to resolve this situation?
Mm.
Yeah.
Indeed. And so we have this sort of moment where the army has been disbanded after that sort of pirate moment. Yeah. They're like, okay, we're all back in Rome. And Sicinius is like, so it's time for that trial, right?
Yeah. Enough chit-chat.
Yeah, it's like, I see we all got distracted and we've all been waiting very patiently, but...
yeah, and this is where Coriolanus is like, okay, but what are the charges?
Yeah. I propose a date.
Yeah.
And so he's like, look... This is going to be great. This is when it's going to be. He starts organising it off his own bat.
He's so excited.
Yeah. It's like the trial of Coriolanus. He sends out all of his messengers to like let all the plebeians who are out in the countryside know. And he's like, be here at a certain time. We're going to get to vote on this. It's going to be important. Everyone's going to get a chance to like weigh in on this trial. It's going to be good, people. And so like everybody's like coming back into the city being like, so what's going on with this Coriolanus?
Yeah, well, Coriolanus in Plutarch's account, he only agrees to go through with this trial as long as the initial charges of usurpation are not changed. So as long as that's what he's up against. Presumably this is a hint that it's going to be difficult to prove that he wanted to actually sort of usurp the government or whatever. And the tribunes insist that the voting for this whole thing takes place according to like the tribes, not the centuries. So that way the plebs aren't... Because if you cast your mind back, listeners, to our episode on the first census and Servius Tullius and that sort of thing, you might recall that the centuries tend to be stacked in favour of the wealthy in terms of voting. Whereas you might have more of a chance if you vote via the tribes.
Via tribes,
yeah. Exactly. So the tribunes are trying to sort of make sure that they're not just going to instantly be outvoted.
Yeah. So the way in which the vote is conducted is important and is being argued about. In your narratives, they've got what is the actual charge open to question. Yeah. That's not even touched on at this point in my narrative from Dionysius. We're just launching into like everybody talking about the trial. Yeah. Because nobody's really settled on what might be happening here. Yeah. Sicinius has intimated that people will be voting on the liberty and safety of the entire state.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty serious.
He's made it big. Yeah. And he's also sent out a polite letter to Coriolanus requesting that he attend if he'd like to represent his own perspective on the issue. And assuring him that he will have all the privileges accorded by the law in connection with trials. And one's senses are set up of some kind. In the meantime, the consuls in the Senate are sort of like, I think we should talk about what's going on here, because they're like, maybe we should prevent this trial from happening. Yeah. Because they're not really sure what's going on at this point. And so they get together to have a chat about that, and we have a speech from Minucius again. Seems to be a big talker at the moment.
Yeah.
And he's like, look, we have to banish sedition from the state. Yeah. That is important. And we have to not engage in any rivalry with the plebeians. So we can't have violent methods. Things have to be just. There must be debate. And importantly, before the trial happens, the Senate ought to give a preliminary decree. This is part of traditional senatorial practice.
Yeah.
So he's kind of arguing, like, look, if we have this trial and we don't really know what's going on, guys, what would be good is if the Senate set up everything by saying, well, as the wise elders of this grand nation, we propose this sort of outcome.
Right. Okay.
So giving the Senate a chance to try and influence the way that the outcome of the trial.
Free on all charges.
yeah. And he's like, and he sort of says this to the Senate and in the presence of the tribunes, and he's like, look, don't abolish this traditional, ancient, and most excellent custom that the Senate has always engaged in. Let us make our preliminary decree before the trial begins. And Sicinius is like, this is so boring, I cannot even begin to
we know what you think.
And he's like, no, you've got to be kidding. And he's just like, forget it. You, like, seriously, like, no, we're having this trial. You don't get to have a decree here. This is not a trial that you've proposed. This is a tribune trial. Like, it's not. It's different, man.
For the people.
This is for the people and only for the people. At that point, all of his tribune colleagues rush up and are like, Sicinius, you know, get yourself off stage. Let's chat. And they're like, no, seriously, like, this is how we can do it. Let us make a statement first, and then let the Senate make their statement. And so the Senate makes their preliminary statement, but we make the pre-preliminary statement. So, so they can come after us.
Just get to the trial.
And so they get to have what they want, and they think that's all going to be good. But man, we will talk first. We will so talk first. And we will let any citizen who wants to talk first, any plebeian who wants to have a say on this trial, to speak before the Senate gets to make their preliminary decree.
Yeah.
So they're kind of like, it's like almost like the first filibuster or something. And so,
I'm like the detail. Oh, the detail.
The detail. It's intense. And so the tribunes come back and they're like, Minucius, that's probably a good idea. You should do your ancient senatorial decree preliminary stuff like you always do at trials. Sure, it sounds great.
It's so interesting that we do have all these different details, because, I mean, Livy is just, like, once again, like, so different to this. I mean, we've kind of already talked about what his short account is like before, but it's just the fact that he basically has Coriolanus saying, I don't know if the plebeians really have a say over me. I mean, it's all about the people. It's not really anything to do with me. And then you got the patricians trying to stop the plebeians from going to the trial by using their clients. But they couldn't stop that from happening. Like, they couldn't stop it entirely, I think, are the exact things. And then you've got, again, the patricians saying, come on, let Coriolanus go. And then you've got Coriolanus not showing up, and the plebeians are unhappy, and it's just like none of this other stuff. It's really confusing, as I say, to try and sort of put it all together, because it just seems so different to this whole situation.
We're dealing with, like, unprecedented levels of people not knowing what should happen or how things should unfold.
True.
And that's partly because Coriolanus has apparently said, well, I'm happy to stand trial, rather than you just all violently throwing me off a rock.
I accept this trial that you propose.
How about we talk it out? But because he hasn't really necessarily done anything, he's feeling pretty confident that will be his way out. And then everybody's picking over the possibility of, like, well, how does a public trial look?
Yes.
If it's something that somebody wants, but we don't really know whether they've done anything.
Well, that's just it. Like, after saying in my kind of Plutarch, that, they're going to charge him with usurpation and those charges can't change. Very quickly, it's clear that they couldn't prove usurpation. So instead, they just, like, sidetrack and start dwelling on the fact that Coriolanus had made this speech against making grain prices low, that he'd been against the tribune, the position of tribunes. It very quickly sort of unravels as far as the initial charges were, I can't finish the sentence.
I was letting you finish. I was like, this is so suspenseful.
Let me start again. They can't follow through, and it starts to unravel. So they have to start going down, like, a side track.
Yeah, and it's important because, like, this is, like, a space in which Romans are attempting to figure out exactly who they are through the systems that they already possess, but realizing that the systems that they currently have are inadequate for dealing with the kind of disagreements and issues that they're facing as a group.
Exactly.
So, in a sense, you can say that this whole sort of mess is, if you like, go down the Coriolanian route, if you like, and say, well, this mess would never have cropped up if we didn't have the tribunes, which is probably true. But on the other hand, you now have these tribunes of the plebs and this representation of the plebeian group that has to be now dealt with, and it's opening up more cans of worms.
Yeah.
Because it turns out that these people have been disenfranchised in every which way possible.
Yeah.
And if you continue to attempt to disenfranchise them when they now have a political representative, you don't get to do that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Or at least not as easily as you used to be able to.
Yeah, this is true. Exactly. It's not just going to be you can walk all over them. It's going to be you were going to be called to account, mister.
So we're in uncharted waters, and Coriolanus is not happy, and the tribunes are not happy, and the Senate is not happy, and the people are not happy. Oh,
yeah, well, I mean,
times.
they also start to sort of dwell on, in the trial, as it goes forward in Plutarch's account, they start to dwell on the fact that when Coriolanus... You might not recall this from the previous episode, but Coriolanus had basically gone off with his clients and his volunteers on a campaign when the people were being difficult.
I'll get the grain myself, guys.
Yeah, exactly. Don't you worry about this. I've got this. And he had virtuously not taken any spoils himself, but they now come back to this and say, well, you know, that should have been given to the public treasury, and instead you gave it to your soldiers. So there. And this is something that sort of Coriolanus wasn't prepared for this.
He thought he was doing the right thing.
Exactly,
he was doing the traditional thing, and also the very sort of like Roman noble thing to do.
Yeah, and so Coriolanus sort of is caught off guard and starts sort of talking about how the people who had taken part in the campaign were like so awesome, presumably trying to justify
why they deserve the booty and not the public.
Yeah, but he's and so you can see how this is very quickly got off track from this initial charge of usurpation. You know, it's really just anything that he did that was kind of a dick move, as far as they were concerned.
They put you on trial for being a douche.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
A douche. All right, well, I feel like this is a fitting end to our episode. Yes.
What will be the verdict against Coriolanus? Will he manage to worm his way out of this one?
Coriolanus, he just keeps giving more and more. Oh, goodness me.
I know. I'm very excited. Tune in next time for more.